This is Surviving as a Civilian. I am your host, Scott. With the help of my friend Andrew, we created this podcast to share success stories of combat veterans and how they overcame the challenges of returning back to civilian life. These are actual stories told by actual veterans. Content warning, this podcast talks about war, and some of the stories in this podcast contain graphic events of violence and may contain explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Additionally, these veterans are telling their story of how they recall the events. Some of the details may have changed over time. Welcome to Surviving as a Civilian. I am Scott, here with Travis Hodsdon. Travis, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm okay. Thanks for reaching out to us. With that, let's just get into it. So, Travis, how old were you when you joined the military?
I was 17 years old.
Okay, at such a young age, what would prompt you to join the military?
It was one of those things where my entire family on the male side had served. And it was one of those ones like watching like my aunts and my uncles serve and hearing what they did. It just kind of piqued an interest, and I was like, I kind of want to do that. They got to travel, and I was like, I want that. And just the sense of knowing that I was going to be able to serve my country was one of the big reasons.
So your family obviously supported your decision to join the military, correct?
All but my mother. She was very much I really don't want you to do this, but she pretty much said, it was my life. And if that is what I felt I needed to do, then in the end, she ended up supporting me.
So what year was this? I forgot to ask.
I joined in 2004.
Okay. All right. So understandably, I totally understand why your mother was not completely on board with you joining, because I think Afghanistan was going on and Iraq was going on at that time.
Yep. Iraq was going on and Afghanistan was kicking off. And I actually had a guy I grew up with. He had just returned from Iraq. And of course I was hearing all his stories about what he was there. And I'm like, dude, I want this. And my mom's like, no, don't do it.
So absolutely, I respect your generation of guys that did that. You guys that joined at a young age, knowing there was two wars going on, not knowing where you might end up. So again, I respect you guys for doing that stuff. So you obviously were talking, so you picked the Army, correct?
Yes.
So above all, why did you pick the Army over the other services?
Well, my uncle was in the Corps. He was a Marine for a while, and he pretty much I initially wanted to join the Marines. I thought everything was awesome about the Marines, and he kind of just pulled me aside, and he was like, look, he's like, I'm saying this because I love you. He's like, you do not have what it takes to be a Marine.
Wait, what?
And yeah, he told me, he's like, you just don't have what it takes, man. He's like, and I'm like, okay, didn't expect that. But in the end, I'm kind of happy he kind of steered me away from it, because I wouldn't have met, the people that I served with while I was in the Army. I wouldn't have made those bonds.
What was his reasoning behind it? Did he have any specifics, or he just said, hey, general broad stroke?
He just pretty much said, this is me looking out for you. You would not make it as a Marine. And then he just left it at that. And it kind of hit me hard, because I think he got out as a gunny. I can't remember. And I respected him for the fact that he'd been in that long. And I'm like, well, if he thinks I can't make it, then I'm going to honor that.
Huh. Okay. So you signed up at 17. You went to MEPS probably. What job did you pick?
Right away, initially I wanted to be an MP. In high school, I took tech classes for law enforcement, and my instructor was an MP. And I was like, man, that'd be a cool job. And then I was like, well, got to keep my options open. I might not be able to get that job. So the one that stuck out to me was combat engineer, 12 Bravo. And I was like, engineering, that sounds like, you're going to do all this math and stuff like that. And I sucked at math. And I was like, I don't know. And the recruiter that I had was an engineer. And he's like, look, man, this is what you get to do. He's like, do you like the idea of blowing things up? And I'm like, absolutely. And he's like, cool. And he showed me this VHS tape about combat engineers. And I'm like, man, that is so much better than being an MP. And he's like, is this what you want to do? And I'm like, absolutely. So I picked 12 Bravo, and that's what I stuck with.
Okay, so did you get to pick your? How was your basic and AIT?
I did straight OSIT through Leonard Wood. It was intense. It just, you didn't have that little break like some people get. So I look back at it now, and I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. At the time, it wasn't a lot of fun, but looking back at it, it was a good time.
Did you get to pick your first duty station, or did your first duty station pick you?
So when I first joined, I started off actually in the Guard. So I went immediately back to Maine, and I ended up in the unit. It was the main battalion was actually out of Vermont, and I ended up in the 3rd of the 172nd Mountain Infantry Unit out of Bangor, Maine, and I served with them first.
Okay, and that was a engineer unit?
Yep, they was actually an infantry unit, and I was one of, there had to have been maybe like 10 of us that were actually engineers.
What was your so on your weekends and your 2 weeks, what would you guys do then for training?
We would just be support. We would either be machine gunners for different platoons. I got fortunate enough, I got to hang out we had snipers in our unit, and I actually got to hang out with them and learn like what they did. And pretty much I didn't really get to do much engineering. I kind of fell in as like just an infantry guy.
Did you end up doing a deployment with the National Guard unit?
I did. Okay. I deployed in 2006 to 2007 with them to Iraq.
What part of Iraq?
I was in southern Iraq. I'm trying to remember the name of that base. Oh, man. I don't know. It was an air base.
Yeah. What was you guys' mission on that deployment?
We were strictly convoy security,
okay.
Escorting convoys to different bases.
Was that so? That was what, year 2006? You said?
Yep, 2006 to 2007.
So, what was going on at the AO you were in? Was it pretty hot, or was it not temperature wise? I'm saying combat wise.
Combat wise, you heard of things going on, like every now and then, like they just take pop shots. Mm-hmm. Not real intense like firefights. IEDs were a big thing for us. We unfortunately lost 2 guys on that deployment to an EFP. They were returning back to base, and one just happened to go off, and we lost Sergeant Vaverka and Sergeant Kelly.
I'm sorry. Can you do a favor to the people that are listening that may not be in the military? Can you explain what an EFP is?
Okay, so basically an EFP, it's a shape-formed explosive charge. A lot of times they use copper, and it's like an inverted cone. And when the blast goes off behind this cone, it pretty much sends it back into a normal cone shape. I think is the best way to explain it. And in doing so, it can penetrate through the armor on our vehicles. And that is what ultimately took the lives of two of the gentlemen that I served with in the National Guard.
Yeah,
it's an absolutely horrifying device that the Taliban were using.
You mean the Iraqis, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a thing too. For those that aren't military don't understand, EFP is basically it shoots this hot molten copper, which is able to penetrate the sides of the vehicle that people are driving in, and it really wreaks a lot of havoc. Unfortunately.
It was an eye opener, because being a unit from Maine, we're such a small state that everybody knew everybody. These were guys that, after drill weekend, you went out and you were hanging out at their house, that next weekend going fishing or whatever. So it was like we all knew each other very well, and it was a real culture shock, especially for me. That was like my real first taste of what combat was.
Yeah, and the thing about National Guard guys and even the Active Guard Reserve guys is they're part of the community that they're in. You know, that's
Yeah.
their employers, their employees, their business owners, their whatever they do for their full-time, their regular job. So it was probably pretty devastating for your unit to have to go through that. Am I correct?
It was not only for the unit, but the state took it very hard as well. It was a pretty big blow.
So, Travis, did anything else stick out to you on that deployment? Anything significant that you want to talk about?
It was the first time I really met people from other countries. Where we actually had Romanians and Australians on our base, and they were probably the coolest people to get to work with. Just like in passing, they did a lot of like the base security, so you get to talk with them waiting to go on mission, and it was pretty cool.
So let me ask you. So I know what it's like for an active duty unit to come back from a deployment. What is it like for a National Guard unit to return from a deployment? What is the I guess ceremony? Because active duty guys, you remember, we get stuck going to a gym, having somebody talk, and then we get to finally go home. What's it like for National Guard?
So when I got back, we actually went up to the Air Guard base that was right there, pretty much down the road from where we drilled, and all the buses show up, and everybody's in this big Black Hawk hangar waiting for us, and you fall into formation, and they had I can't remember who exactly spoke, but they, hey, your family's home, and let's welcome home the guys. And they lifted the hangar doors, and we marched in. Of course, we got to see our families. And then they pretty much said, "Hey, you're released. Go to your loved ones. Be back here tomorrow at like 7:00." And so we got released. We got to see our families. They put us all up in a hotel room. And pretty much the next morning, 7:00, we showed up and we started re-in processing, doing medical and all that stuff, turning in all our gear to the armory. And then, we did that all in a day. They pretty much rushed us an entire day, got it done. And then they're like, cool, we don't want to see you we got 3 months off. And so after 3 months, we just reported back into drill.
So the craziest thing I had to work, I trained some National Guard guys in my time, and I will tell you that how long was that deployment, Travis?
That one was 14 months for that one.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to, for those of you who don't know about the military or the National Guard, unfortunately for the National Guard guys, they do this thing called pre-mob. So 60 days ish before the deployment, they have to go basically to lockdown, doing all the stuff that active duty units do throughout the year are pretty much up to date on. So shots, qualifications, everything you'd have to do in an active duty unit, they smash into like 2 months. So these National Guard guys, they activate 60 days prior to the deployment. They do a 14-month deployment. So now you're at what, 15, 16 months, right? And then then they come back and they're supposed to demobilize for another 30 days, which means you do all your post stuff. And for you, luckily, so for a National Guard unit to deploy for 14 months, this time, it usually is 15, 16 months total time that they're occupied. And is that an accurate statement, Travis?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so, and from my experience, those guys get stuck on General Order Number 1 as soon as they start mobilizing. And for those of you who don't know what General Order Number 1 is, it means no drinking. So, yes, they are still in the United States and not in theater. However, they are stuck at some sort of camp somewhere, having to be sober 60 days prior before their deployment.
Yeah, we got lucky. The night before we went to mobilize, they let us all go out, and we all met at the bar at the hotel, and we all got to hang out and have a drink. I couldn't because I was only 20 years old, so it's like, okay, that kind of sucks. But I got to hang out with everybody, and then when we got back, our brigade commander showed up and told us all to haul ass to this one part. We moved out of Fort Dix, New Jersey, and he ended up bringing 2 kegs with him from Vermont, and he's like, I don't care. He pretty much was one of those, you served. I'm proud of you guys. Everybody gets a beer, and we got to do that. But yes, well, yep. For the rest of the time though, it was like you don't touch alcohol. It was a big no-no.
So what was did you deploy again with the National Guard?
I did not. After I returned from that deployment, I ended up talking to a good friend of mine who was a recruiter, and I went active.
Okay, so Travis, can you briefly explain the approvals and the process from going National Guard to active? And the reason I'm asking is because I'm a little foggy on it, but I do know it's two different entities. So it's National Guard, you're owned by the state. Active and reserves, you're owned by the federal government. So just kind of lay that out for folks.
So pretty much, for those that are have been in, they know the process of like clearing a unit. Honestly, I went to my recruiter and I'm like, look, I'm a National Guard right now. I just got back from Iraq. I'd only been home about a month. And I'm like, I kind of like this active duty lifestyle. I knew what I was doing for the most part every day. I enjoyed it. So I'm like, I want to do this full time. And he's like, all right. He's like, well, let's, you got to get permission to leave your unit and all that. You got to be in good standing with them type thing. And I'm like, all right, cool. And so I went back to my guard unit, which was 25 minutes down the road. And like, hey, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I'd really like to go active. I'd like to leave the National Guard. And they're like, okay, well, that kind of sucks. Kind of like happening here. So they, I pretty much inventoried all my gear like a CIF layout, made sure I had all my gear there. They inventoried it. They signed off on the paperwork saying that I had officially been cleared from the unit. Took that paperwork back to my recruiter and handed it to him. And then he was like, cool, where do you want to go?
And where did you decide to go?
I ended up going to Germany.
Okay.
It was probably one of my favorite duty stations.
Okay, so I'm assuming you were still single, right?
Yes.
Okay, because you probably had to been 22-ish, 21 maybe?
I was 21.
Okay, so
21 going on 22.
What was your experience like in Germany?
It was a blast. If you ever get a chance, even just to visit Germany, highly recommend it. The culture, the sites, the architecture, everything is just so beautiful. I fell into the 370th Engineer Company while I was there out of Bamberg. Beautiful city, great unit. It was kind of hard to get past the language barrier because everybody speaks German. But your first week there, they do this thing called Head Start. You're not even allowed to leave post. And for those first week and a half, and they teach you your basic German, like how to ask for a train station, a cab, bathrooms, and all of that. And near the end, they show you how to use the local transportation system. They show you how to use a bus and order a bus ticket, how to do the trains. You go to a restaurant and they teach you how to order the food properly and all that fun stuff.
So overall, Germany was good for you.
Oh, I loved it. It was an absolute blast.
Did you end up deploying from Germany?
I did. I went back out to Iraq. That was 2008 to 2009, and I was in Baghdad at the Stryker complex.
Okay. And so I'm glad you brought that up. So what is the difference? Compare the two, deploying with a National Guard unit as opposed to deploying with a active duty unit.
Results may vary for everybody. But for me, it was, I noticed with the National Guard, a lot of you work with these guys outside of the military. Some of these guys, you're hanging out on the weekends at their house, and then you only meet up 1 month, 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year to see these guys. And then you deploy with them for a little over a year. You get to know everybody and all that. And it's pretty laid back for the most part. You're kind of, sometimes you have trouble separating the civilian side from the Army side because you know everybody outside, you know everybody by first name basis. And then, you know, while you're deployed, you can't be calling Joe, Joe. You got to be calling him, you know, Sergeant or Sir, you know. But like active, for me, I feel was easier in a sense because you fall into that like a groove where everything has like a working order. It has a repetition, has a pattern that you just grow accustomed to.
Okay, and then so your deployment from Germany, what was your guys' mission over there?
We did convoy security while we were there. And the platoon I was in specifically, we actually had a secondary job. We did crater repair, which was an interesting gig. Essentially, for the crater repair, we, middle of the night, loaded up in our trucks with a bunch of quickcrete. And we were given specific blast craters from like previous IED blasts that had already been marked for, you know, hey, EOD came out here and cleared them. And we would ride out and we would have to visually inspect, make sure there was nothing back in the hole. And we'd fill that thing with concrete and put like a timestamp, essentially, like our little signature on it, and fill these blast holes up.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, Travis, I think the reason they did that because it was more easier to set another IED inside something like that. And the concrete was supposed to deter the Iraqi from doing that. The Iraqis from doing that. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Anything significant happen on that deployment?
That was a really crazy deployment. I'm not sure if you're familiar with there was a sergeant that shot a bunch of soldiers in the behavioral health clinic in Baghdad.
I was not aware of that.
That happened 2008, 2009. That was my commo sergeant that did that.
Okay, so please explain that. Can you elaborate a little bit, please?
All right, so this was actually a guy I used to have coffee with every morning. So it messed me up a little bit because this is a guy I talked to regularly and seemed okay, you know, but, you know, you never know what's going through somebody's head. And he apparently, well, not apparently, he did this. He went to a behavioral health clinic meeting over on Big Base there. I think it was Anaconda was the bigger part over in Anaconda. And he just snapped and he shot a bunch of people and killed a bunch of people. And the last I knew, he is still locked up at, I think, Leavenworth.
Boy, that is tremendous. What is his name? Do you remember?
Honestly, for the life of me, I can't remember his last name.
Okay. I'm sure if people want to find out, they can probably Google it.
You could honestly just Google up behavioral health clinic shooting in Baghdad, and he'll pop right up. Okay.
Well, so how long was that deployment?
That was a year.
Okay. And then you're saying pretty much did anything significant happen during that time, or just besides your friend doing that horrible incident?
Yeah, that was really the big traumatic thing that happened to us on that.
So you redeployed back to Germany, and since you were single, you were probably only stationed in Germany for a couple of years, right?
It was a 3-year tour.
Okay. So the deployment probably took up a lot of that, getting ready to and coming back, right?
Yes. In that time frame, I did end up getting married.
Oh,
to my first wife.
To a German?
Yes, I did get married, and we ended up having a little boy. And yeah, he lives. I mean, he doesn't live with me now. He lives in Maine. But yeah, I had a little boy, and I was married then.
While you were in Germany, you got married?
Yes.
To a German girl?
No, she was American. She was actually prior service Navy.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, all right. So okay, all right. So you got what led you to leave Germany then, and where did you go?
Germany. It pretty much just got down to the end of it where I was actually kind of homesick. Living in Maine, you know, like I miss my mom, I miss my dad, and all that. You know, I miss my siblings, and I was like, you know, I just spent 3 years over here in another country. You know, I couldn't go see them on a weekend. So I'm like, I want to be closer to home. And I'm like, what's closer to Maine? And the recruiter's like, hey, there's Fort Drum. And I'm like, where the hell is Fort Drum? And they're like, it's in New York. I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. And he's like, are you sure you want to go to Fort Drum? And I'm like, yeah, it's close to home, absolutely. And he's like, it snows there, right? And I'm like, I lived in New England. Yeah, it's snow. What's the big deal? He's like, all right, cool. If that's what you want, sign here. And I signed the line. He's like, congratulations, you're going to Drum. Have fun.
So, what was your experience like at Drum?
I loved it. I met a lot of awesome people. Like I got to serve with you at Drum, and I made a lot of good friends there. I mean, I know I wasn't the most stellar soldier in the world, but I still I felt very privileged to serve there and serve with everybody at Drum.
So obviously you deployed from Drum.
Yes.
And where was that deployment to?
It was Afghanistan. It was the 2011-2012 deployment.
Okay. What was your job on that deployment?
I moved around a lot. I started off actually as just the battalion RTO. Not an elaborate job, but I mean, man the radios, pretty much just did that.
Travis, can you tell everybody what RTO stands for?
RTO is you're a radio operator. You pretty much sit in front of a radio and you log any incoming transmissions. You make calls to other units, checking for like statuses on things, doing radio checks, making sure everybody's still connected along the system.
Okay, and then you said you bounced around a lot. So where'd you go to?
I stayed at Passab. It's just my job changed. I ended up becoming assigned to as the main raid camera operator for Passab, and essentially what the raid camera was about 100-foot tall tower on the back of a trailer, and the camera was similar to one on the front of like an Apache helicopter, and you had like your night vision, red hot, and all that stuff on it. You had a designated rangefinder. It was the coolest camera in the world. I mean, you could look way, way out further than you could see with your naked eye. And I pretty much watched the perimeter of the fob and kept eyes on, if you guys went out and you were readily in the area and we could see you with the camera, we would keep an eye on you guys, make sure, we didn't see anything that you didn't see. And then near the end of the deployment, I ended up being the battle NCO.
So what anything significant happened in your opinion on that deployment that you want to share?
Afghanistan for me was like, I mean, my first deployment, knowing that I had friends die, was an eye opener. That was my first like real taste of what combat was. For me, I have to say Afghanistan was my hardest deployment out of the three. And why it was the hardest is for a lot of reasons. You guys, I trained with all you guys before we deployed. And it was like, that's what I knew. And then I went into an admin staff kind of setting, the more behind the scenes setting. And, for me, it was rough. I had a hard time swallowing my pride a little bit because I was an engineer in a staff job, essentially. And I didn't like it, to be honest. It was the whole thing. It was like, well, I'm an engineer. I need to be out there with my brothers, helping them. But I finally had to swallow my pride and accept the fact that it was like, well, I was put here for a reason, for probably a higher reason, and I'm doing my part still, making sure, that my brothers and sisters in arms are going to be safe. Hardest, though, I think, for that deployment was when I was actually the battle NCO. And essentially, I just sat in front of a big old 3-screen computer, and it had a bunch of chat windows on it, and we could see what was going on in our battle space. So our big area operation, and it's when guys that I knew were getting hurt, and it was like I felt kind of helpless at that point because they're out there fighting, doing, their engineer jobs. Some of the infantry guys out there I was good friends with, them doing their jobs and hearing, hey, so-and-so stepped on a landmine and blew his legs off. And then I'm like, well, what the shit? I was like, how can I help him? You're instantly, you get put in this mindset of like, I got to help him. But then you're kind of just sitting back several miles away and not able to like physically do anything.
I bet that was difficult.
It was rough. I took a few instances very much to heart. It messed with me a little bit because these were guys like I really admired and really looked up to, like Sergeant McKinney when he got hurt. I was just the RTO that day, but I remember I just came inside from having a cigarette, and the battle NCO at the time was like, "Hey, I need to talk to you." And I'm like, "Oh God, what do I do now?" It was like that's never good when you hear that. And he just kind of pulled me aside. He's like, "Hey, you know Sergeant McKinney?" I'm like, "Yeah, I trained with him. He's a really cool dude." And he's like, "Hey, he got hurt." And I'm like, "What?" And it's like, I mean, I remember him saying like, he looked like I saw a ghost. And I was like, "Is he okay?" And I was panicking. I was freaking out because this was a guy, I really looked up to. Somebody that, I trained with, someone that trained me and taught me things. And it was just one of those ones is like, well, what can I do to help him? And he's like, "Dude, there's nothing I can do." He's already on a helicopter off to Kandahar. And then of course when we lost like Sergeant Colors, like that was a really hard blow. He was somebody that his tent was like right next to mine in Afghanistan. So we'd see each other in the mornings. And being, he was from Connecticut, I was from Maine, we were the New England guys. So it was kind of to me, it was kind of like a big deal. And so I was the battle NCO the day that event happened. And I remember essentially, without breaking any like top secret shit or anything like that, when something happens, you get a battle roster number sent to you. And essentially the battle roster is either it's either one initial or two initials for your name, and then it's your last four. And I had this massive binder. I literally had everybody's battle roster number that served in our general area. And I remember it popped up, and they said that there was a hero flight and like an urgent. I can't remember the exact terminology for it, but I'm like, oh crap! So I'm like, protocol was you had to check the book. You had to figure out what unit it was, and then if you found out what unit it was, we were supposed to reach out and be like, hey, I don't know if you're aware, but there was an incident, and these are the battle roster numbers. It's telling us that these are your guys. And I'd done a few in the short time I was the battle NCO, and I never thought that, this would be people that would pop up that I knew. So it was, we're sitting there and going through, and I read that battle roster number, and you write it down who it is, and I stopped, and I just looked at it, and I'm like, no way. And went back, and I read it again, and I just remember I was holding that paper, and I was shaking, and I handed it off to the battle captain, and I felt so sick to my stomach because they were like, this is the battle roster number for a hero flight. And essentially a hero flight it's the code that they use for saying that they were unfortunately no longer with us. They were killed in action. And I had, hero flight and then wounded. I believe it was Lomax that was injured. And I just remember I was just shaking so bad. I was just so upset. And I remember walking outside. They're like, dude, go outside. You need to go outside. I remember just breaking down outside, completely losing composure, losing my shit.
Yeah, that was a difficult one for all of us. That really took a toll on everybody. But, he was such a well-respected NCO and a friend. It just...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and the way it happened was unbelievable.
Yeah, he loved all of us. He was that guy that, whether it was during the duty day or after the duty day, he was one of those guys that like truly just he loved everybody he served with and cared about us.
Yeah. So that was a year-long deployment.
Yes.
All right. So once we got back from that deployment, what was your next step?
After that one, I was kind of like, after everything I went through out there in Afghanistan, it wasn't as crazy as it was for a lot of the guys that, they went out the wire every single day. I got to go out the wire. I think out of the entire year that I was out there, I probably went out the wire maybe equivalent of 60 days. And I got back and I was like, you know what? I'm like, I think this is really time for me to just kind of to hang up my hat. I've deployed 3 times. I've served this long. I'm proud of what I've done. I've made phenomenal friends. I made these great bonds with all these people. And as much as it sucks to leave, I think I'm done. And I thought it over real well. And I was like, well, I don't want to just leave cold turkey in a sense and just be like, I'm done and dive right into the civilian world head first. So I ended up going down, I think it was Clark Hall, the big building there where you in process and all that. And I went up and talked to the National Guard recruiter and like, look, I got 4 months left here at Drum. I really don't want to go directly into the civilian world. Can I go back to the Guard for a short stint? And he's like, yeah, how long do you want to do it? I'm like, I don't know, like maybe a year. He's like, done. And they signed me up and assigned me to a unit in my hometown. So it just happened to be an engineer unit that just got stood up, and I ended up going to them.
And how long were you with those guys for?
A little over a year.
Did you deploy with them?
I did not.
Okay.
They were actually slotted to deploy when I got to their unit, so I was going to end up being rear detachment for them, and they ended up that their deployment got canceled, so I spent a year with them and got out on a medical.
Correct. So you got medically basically out of the Army, right?
Yes.
Okay. So before we transition to what you did after, can you explain to me what your process for getting out was? Like, did you? Because I don't know what it is with National Guard. I know what it is with active duty, but what does the National Guard do for you when you decided to leave the Army?
Honestly, for me, since I was getting out on medical, I had to go to a lot of like different medical appointments. My back was essentially just, it was wrecked. And my knees were really bad. I wasn't physically able to do my job anymore. It was way too painful on my body to do. So they're like, yeah, you've been in a hot minute. It's like you fulfilled your obligation. And you know what? If you really want to do this, we're going to help you. So I went to a bunch of appointments, and it was just like demobbing in a sense. You went to your different shops, your different offices, and pretty much I just like out processed. And then they're like, hey, so we're just waiting for your results back about your medical issues. So, you do you, homie. Check in every month. And I didn't have to go to drill. I pretty much called them for drill weekend. I called them the day it started, and I called them the last day of drill and just let them know I was still breathing.
Okay. How did they set you up for like how to build a resume, how to basically, so the Army, the active duty guys have a SFL TAP, Soldier for Life, Transition Assistant Program. Did you have to do all that too?
In the Guard, no. They actually just they wrote out a certificate that had my name on it and said you've been honorably discharged under medical conditions from the main Army National Guard. And I got a coin.
That doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah, I was just like, wow, that was it. And I'm like, active duty, when I was leaving active from Drum, I did like the ACAP stuff, like how to make a resume. And that was like absolutely awesome. But the Guard is kind of like, oh, you're done. You're just going to go back to a mundane 9 to 5. Have fun.
So is there any advice you give somebody that is ETSing out of the military and just kind of going to the civilian world? What advice what would you look back and think about and wish you would have done differently? So
getting out, it's it's one of those feelings. It's like, it's mixed feelings. Some people are super happy to get out. Some people are kind of bummed out. I kind of fell in the middle. But one thing people got to remember is once you leave the military and get out, rank doesn't exist. So you could get out as a sergeant major, you could get out as a captain. Once you leave the military, a lot of places, in all honesty, don't care. They're gonna be like, cool, you were a lieutenant in the Army. That's great. You're the new guy here. You're low. You pretty much start at the bottom of the totem pole again. You pretty much go back to private status. I feel I did all right. I was nothing stellar. I got out as a specialist. It's when you get out, you got to remember that the structure that we had while we were in, we knew what we were doing every day. We knew where we fell in line. We knew we had that chain of command set up. And in a sense, when you get out, it's gone. People don't know where they belong in line. It's a little bit of a shit show to say, but you just kind of got to bear with it. You got to find your bearings and kind of center yourself again and just be like, look, this is just like I'm starting over in the Army. And you just got to, at least for me, that's what I did. And I was like, yep, I'm low man on the totem pole again. I got this. And just kind of push forward.
So what was your next move then after you're finally done with the military?
I moved to Georgia for the second relationship. When I had left drum, I had a really bad falling out with my first wife. Things just weren't working. So we ended up getting divorced, which it sucked. But it's life. It happens. So for some reason, the universe told me that it was supposed to happen. So I rolled with it. I ended up meeting somebody from down here in Georgia, and we clicked, became friends. One thing led to another. We got together, and we ended up getting married. So on to marriage number 2.
Let me, before you, do you think that your marriage kind of went sour due to the time you spent in the military or the deployments and stuff?
It had a little bit to do with it. There were some other underlying factors. I'm not gonna throw her name under the bus or anything like that. And some things happened on her end that were not very good, and we just decided that no, we weren't going to do this anymore for the better interest of both of us.
Okay.
And then I ended up getting remarried in 2015.
Okay.
And we unfortunately are no longer together, but I did get a beautiful daughter out of it, and she actually lives with me. Geez, I'm surprised she hasn't come in here and tried yelling at me yet.
I'd be okay if she did. Okay. So everything's good now. You're doing well. You got your daughter. Everything's.
Oh yeah.
Where you want to be at.
It's been fun. It's I got to I reached some dream jobs that I kind of wanted to do before the military. I've always wanted to do tattooing and body piercing stuff, that crazy modifying stuff. And I got lucky enough. I got an apprenticeship about a year after being here, and I learned how to tattoo and learned how to do body piercing. And I've been doing that for 6 years now, give or take. And I also like the idea of acting, and it's not like the craziest acting job, but I work at one of the biggest haunted house attractions in America as a haunt actor. So I get paid to chase people with chainsaws and scare them.
Okay, so does that explain some of the Facebook posts you put out, or is that something different?
That's a totally different job. And probably the crazy world that you're referring to is Wasteland. That is essentially one long week out of the year in September. It's typically the last week of September. Anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 people gather in the Mojave Desert, and it's a giant party as if the world ended. It's a Mad Max inspired festival. We have a Thunderdome. We have the Atomic Cafe. the vehicles, you dress the part, and it's a good outlet to just get out and get away from everything that's going on in the world.
And how long does that last for? Maybe you said it already.
It's roughly a week. It's based out of California City, California.
And you go to this every year?
I did my first big wave. That's the Holy Grail one, Wasteland Weekend. I did my first one 2 years ago. They didn't host it last year because of the COVID restrictions. But we throw different little festivals across the United States, and there's even some like out of the United States in other countries. Like in March, I'm going to one called Aftermath, and it's literally a friend of mine has a big piece of property, and we have structures that look like survived a nuclear blast, and we live out there for a week. And it's just, honestly, it's pretending the world ended. You know, nothing, the world as we know it today doesn't exist. It's bartering things for other things, hanging out, having a drink with friends. And at the end of that week, everybody just disperses back into the world again.
So it's, and I don't want to insult anybody or anything like that, but is it almost like, the reenactments or the like medieval time type stuff only in reverse? Like it's
similar. Okay. Yeah. It's like that, except it's post-apocalyptic.
Right. So it's a large gathering of friends who just like to, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's essentially, it's like LARPing. I mean, that's the best way to describe it. Cosplay meets like live action role play stuff.
So do you guys actually do battles or fight each other, or are there stage things? Or?
We do. We do a thing. It's called Jugger. And you wear essentially riot gear and you beat the hell out of each other until someone falls down. You know, we do another thing. It's called Dogtown Jugger, and it's not a real dog skull. It's a 3D printed one, and that's essentially your football. And it combines the jugger fighting with football. It's pretty interesting.
I bet it is. So how do you guys feel about like people spectating or that's not allowed? Like
it's something like let's just say like in March at that event I'm going to, if it was one of those ones where you're like, dude, I want to come out and I want to see it. The only thing they ask you to do, wear some like dirty, ragged clothes.
Okay.
So it looks like you crawled out of the dirt, you know?
Gotcha.
And you can hang out, you know, I've seen people come in and just bring a camera because they want to just take pictures of it, and they walk around and you get a feel for the vibe. Everybody there, it's a really cool, accepting world. It's a really good vibe. You make a lot of good, strong bonds with people, and you may see them only once a year, but it's fun.
Well, that's great. Well, Travis, do you have anything else you want to share with us?
One thing that I know is really important to everybody, and I know it's mentioned a lot in your podcast, is when it comes to, we feel like we're struggling and we're kind of falling in a bad rut. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I suffered from that. I'm not going to go too far into it, but I fell into a suicidal rut at one point, and it was bad. I went as far as driving to Home Depot and getting rope, and I had it all planned out how I was going to do it. I was going to wait till, my whole family went to sleep and all that, and I was just going to do it. And it's one of those ones where, like, I look back on it now and I'm very thankful I didn't do it. I know a lot of people are thankful I didn't do it, but the thing is, you're not any less of a person if you ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. It's one of those, I think one of the best things I did is I asked for help. I had a friend, he was with us out in Afghanistan. He worked at the district center. He was one of the district center guys. He just happened to notice that I wasn't myself. And it's something that, we as fellow veterans, I know we do it, is we need to keep an eye out for each other. A line that a friend of mine used is we're all we got. And we're starting to be that generation, like how World War II and World War I, a lot of these guys are no longer with us. The generation is disappearing. And we're now at a point where we're going to be that generation where we're just part of a history book at that point. And it's one of those ones where it's like, don't be scared to ask for help. You know, we've served together. We may have only served together and just know each other in passing, but at the end of the day, you know, we signed a dotted line, you know, up to the amount of our lives that we would fight and defend each other, you know, and it's one of those ones where, you know, my buddy, he was stationed in American Samoa as a commander for one of their, I think their guard units out there. I'm not 100% sure, but he was a commander out there, and he just noticed I seemed off, and he just happened to reach out, and we talked for almost 2 hours. And, you know, he's like, he got me out of that rut, and I'm very thankful he did. Find outlets for things. For me, it's the Wasteland universe. I mean, that's the closest I'm going to get into the desert again to do anything crazy, you know. So it's find an outlet, try to find a hobby. Don't be scared to talk to somebody. It's a big deal, you know, swallow your pride, but, you know, at the end of the day, you're going to be thankful you did.
Well, Travis, that's a very powerful message, and thank you for sharing your personal story. I think, you know, we, as this podcast, we may never see how much help it might help, but just to hear other people that were brave like you and actually sought out help will mean a lot and definitely make a difference to somebody.
And it was one of those, like me reaching out to your podcast was one, I didn't know about it. So it was literally how I discovered it was I just happened to be farting around on Facebook and saw, I think it was Sergeant McKinney had shared, and I'm like, what is this? And I just happened to listen. I'm like, so I went all the way back to like the very first one you did, and I listened through all of them, and it's little things like this, hearing other people's stories, hearing what they went through, whether it is, you know, super elaborate where, you know, they were in the shit every single day to where, like, I mean, I wasn't. It shows that, you know, we're not really different. We're all the same. We're all going through the same fights, the same struggles. And at the end of the day, you know, we promised each other when we swore in that, you know, I would never leave a fallen comrade. And it's one of those mindsets, just because, you know, we're not actively serving anymore, it's still an oath that you take to heart. And you never want to leave a comrade that's down, even if they're across the ocean somewhere or, you know, across the United States. It's one of those ones I personally take to heart. And I'll 100%, like Sergeant Hokie did, is I'm going to give out my number. My number is 706-244-5085. And I'll answer my phone for anybody. You can shoot me a text. It doesn't matter, time, day, night. I could be in the middle of something. If you reach out to me and just like, look, I need to talk, I'm not doing all right, or, you know, I'm not feeling okay, I'm going to answer for you. I may not know you, I may know you, but at the end of the day, I don't care what branch you are, first responder. If you need someone to talk to, I'm always more than happy to help a fellow comrade out.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And like we always say, if you need help, get help. And if you can give help, give it. And you certainly are doing that by providing your number. And I want to thank you for the time, Travis, and thank you for
absolutely
your message.
Yeah, it's good to hear from you. It's good to hear a voice of somebody I haven't, you know, seen or talked to really in years. So for me, you know, doing this was a good stress reliever, a good, you know, kind of puts you in a good headspace.
Well, we definitely appreciate it, and the listeners will definitely appreciate your story.
Well, thank you for letting me share my story. For me, it's a good, it's a therapy thing in a sense. You know, it's good to don't bottle stuff, just let it out.
Right. And you know, you got my number now, so if you ever have a problem or just want to shoot the shit, you can always shoot me a text.
Absolutely. I appreciate you for that.
All right, Travis. Thank you.
And you're always welcome to come out to one of these wasteland things if you want.
I am definitely putting it in the maybe pile.
Sounds good.
All right. Take care, Travis.
You too.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Getting the message out about suicide prevention is a team effort. We need people to be brave enough to tell their stories. We need supporters who care enough to spread the word. If you have a story you want to share, please email us at survivingasacivilian.casting@gmail.com. And if you want to help share this project, like and subscribe to Surviving as a Civilian on Instagram and Facebook. The most important thing Andrew and I want to get across is that if you need help, get help. And if you can give help, please do it. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is at 1-800-273-8255. Until next time.